What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word anarchism? Maybe it's chaos, disorder, or maybe even edgy teenagers.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
If so, then I would like to teach you about the real meaning of anarchism. Setting aside the obvious negative connotations of the word, anarchism is just another form of government, similar to monarchies and democracies, except for one thing: there is no government. Anarchism is the vision for a society that's entirely controlled by its citizens, with absolutely no hierarchy or government of any kind. Notice how I said it's the vision for a society. That's because it hasn't worked out quite yet. But hypothetically, let's imagine that we all lived in a world without any kind of government. How would a society like that even work? How would laws be decided? And most importantly, what's stopping everyone from just, killing each other? Well, hear me out for a moment. You just get along. I know that sounds a bit ridiculous, but considering that the United States of America still struggles to solve those issues, I feel like the idea of just getting along wouldn't be as flawed as you might think. But even if you're still skeptical, just humor me for a minute. The central premise of anarchism is that order can be achieved through mutual cooperation without the need for any leaders. Laws and expectations would be collectively agreed upon as well as enforced by the community. Let's start with the most glaring issue. What's stopping society from just immediately erupting into chaos? Well, in every country, there are laws in place that keep people in check, and trained law enforcement officers who are responsible for enforcing the law. And of course, there are penalties given to anyone who steps too far out of line. There isn't anything inherently wrong with this system. It's just meant to discourage any behavior that would harm the community. However, it fails to address the underlying issues that cause people to act out in the first place. The biggest incentive for people to cooperate is because they'll face consequences if they don't. This system does work, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't seem like the healthiest method. Anarchism, on the other hand, is fundamentally based on voluntary cooperation. Although that sounds like it would fall apart immediately, I believe that the shared goal of working together to build a society that benefits everyone would likely be a much stronger incentive than simply avoiding negative consequences. And when people act out of their own volition rather than obligation, their contributions become much more meaningful. This voluntary cooperation would strengthen the bond of the community, which would reduce the incentive for crime in the first place. And even if crime does occur, the community itself is responsible for maintaining order, so others would step in to resolve the situation and ensure justice is served. And when it comes to contributing, instead of society forcing you into submission, anarchist communities just encourage you to be involved. Imagine your mom barges into your room and she tells you to clean your room or else she's going to take away your Xbox. Now imagine that instead of threatening your Xbox, she politely requests that you clean your room. Most people would probably be happier doing a task they chose to do rather than one they were forced to. And while that sounds like it would just be a freeloader's dream, studies on conditional cooperation have shown that people are much more likely to contribute when they see others contributing as well. And even if someone chooses not to pull their own weight, the community can always get involved and give them the encouragement they need. Or they can just kick them out. Now on to the next thing. How would decision-making work? In the US, instead of voting on the decisions being made, citizens elect representatives who vote on their behalf. This is an example of a democratic republic. On the surface, this shouldn't be that bad of a system, even if it is a little convoluted. However, the process of electing representatives can potentially split the community into two or more sides with very polarized views. This can create an enormous amount of tension between parties, which I'm sure most of us can attest to. And unfortunately, even if the overwhelming majority of people agree with a representative, there's no way of telling if they'll eventually shift their agenda due to being incentivized or simply out of their own self-interest. And by the time they do, they're already in a position of power. Anarchism solves this problem by letting the community vote directly on decisions, not just on the people making them. This would allow everyone to discuss ideas freely, promoting debate and compromise between different viewpoints. This is called a direct democracy, which doesn't sound like something that would belong in anarchism, but it's actually a key component, as that's what gives every citizen a voice and allows for decisions to be made without the need for representatives. And giving every citizen the ability to voice their opinions in a meaningful way would also contribute to a higher quality of life and a lower political violence rate. But aside from the voting system, one huge, massive, enormous problem I have with the United States is the widespread use of impersonal and dehumanizing policies. Let me explain by using the judicial system as an example. Let's imagine there are two criminals who are both in possession of illicit substances. Let's say person A is caught with 199 grams of the substance. At minimum, they would be sentenced to 2 years in prison with a potential sentencing of up to 20 years. Now let's look at person B, who was just caught with 201 grams. What will their sentence be? Since it's only 2 grams more, it should be about the same, right? Right? For being caught with 201 grams, person B faces a minimum of 5 years and a potential life sentence. That's, at minimum, 3 extra years in prison, all over 2 grams, and that's not even taking into account the potential life sentence. What the frick? Needless to say, the anarchist judicial system operates nothing like this. Punishments would be agreed on by the community the same way everything else is decided, and every case would be personalized to the individual, ensuring that the severity of the punishment always fits the severity of the crime. Another problem I have with the US is how easy it is to get away with exploiting legal loopholes. No matter what's done to prevent it, nothing seems to stop people from devising ways to benefit themselves at the expense of others. And even though everyone can clearly see what they're doing, nothing can be done about it since it's technically not against the law. Anarchism doesn't care about any of that. If someone's caught blatantly exploiting systems for their own personal gain, the defense, it's technically not illegal, won't protect them from an appropriate punishment. And another thing about the US I find disheartening is that capitalism has created a world where corporations can rival entire governments with how much influence they have. And no matter what a business was originally intended to do, their primary objective is always to make more money. Now picture the medical industry. Modern medicine is absolutely incredible, and it's amazing that quality healthcare is readily available to so many people. It should always be the industry's highest priority to make sure everyone is healthy so they can keep contributing to society. I don't think there's any goal more noble than that. Besides the pursuit of wealth, of course. At the end of the day, most medical institutions are businesses, which means even though they exist to provide medical care, that objective is secondary to making money. Imagine a hospital gets a patient with a curable chronic illness. Sure, they could cure them, but why do that when they could just keep treating the symptoms instead? Now they've got a repeat customer. And as technology and research develop further, healthcare will become even more effective and affordable. This means that people will need medical care less often, and it'll be cheaper when they do, which means less revenue for the businesses. This would force the institutions to continually raise prices to compensate, making the cost of even simple treatments exorbitant. So looking at it from a business perspective, hospitals are incentivized not to treat patients to the best of their ability. I don't even think I need to say it, but yeah, this kind of thing doesn't happen in anarchism. Just like with the rest of the community's needs, healthcare would be administered to the people who need it. That way, patients can get back to being functional members of society as soon as possible. And medical institutions would have no ulterior motives, you know, the way it should be. And it's for all of these reasons that I declare anarchism to be unquestionably and definitively the best societal structure in every conceivable way. Nah, I'm just kidding. That would fall apart instantly. I do genuinely believe there are a lot of things anarchism gets right, but to no one's surprise, it's still fundamentally flawed. You done looking? Okay. As much as I believe that anarchism could truly be the foundation for a prospering society, it's admittedly very far from perfect. And I would say the biggest flaw is probably the constant power vacuum. Since anarchist governments have a habit of not existing, there's nothing stopping a small group from forming and deciding they want to be in charge now. Unless the entire community was devoted to the cause, any weak links could end up compromising the entire system. But even if everyone was 100% devoted, anarchism still faces a massive scalability issue. On a small scale with upwards of maybe 1 to 200 people, it could totally be possible to maintain a thriving community. However, problems quickly start to appear once the population gets too large. The impersonality of larger communities would weaken people's sense of accountability, meaning fewer people would choose to contribute. And taking hundreds or even thousands of ideas into consideration when making decisions would slow the process down to a crawl. So basically, it would be impossible to get anything done. Well, actually, I guess it could still be doable. Since a larger population size would reduce people's accountability, that could probably be fixed by making an enforced list of expectations to make sure everyone does exactly what they need to. Wait a minute, and I guess you could still give larger populations a say in the decision-making process. I imagine the most efficient way would be to have them elect representatives who speak on their behalf. Hey, well, at least the judicial system would still be personalized to each case, so ensuring justice is served wouldn't be an issue. But with such a large population, crime rates would probably be higher, so it might be a good idea to make some guidelines to help speed up the process. Aw, son of a... So yeah, many of our flawed systems that are responsible for creating tension and injustice are ultimately necessary for supporting such a large population. It's unfortunate, but even I can admit it's far better than the alternative. In a perfect world, anarchism would work flawlessly. But then again, so would every other system. None of them are inherently bad, they just all share the same critical weak point. And that weak point is people. Because people suck. But even though anarchy has more flaws than I can count, I believe there's a lot we can learn from it. I think the utopian vision of anarchism does an excellent job highlighting some of the things that could be improved on in our own societies. But most of all, it really shows just how great life can be when we all choose to set aside our differences and work together. That was really lame. Thanks for watching.